Hey everybody! Today I want to talk about the difference between doing a water change versus topping off our tanks and how that affects the total dissolved solids, the nitrate, the phosphate, the other dissolved organics that are in our tanks, etc. I shot a video earlier and in it I made a statement that was very wrong, and I just made the statement in passing without giving it much thought. And after saying it and uploading the video, I got to thinking about what I had said and I realized how wrong I was. It's all stuff I know, but under the scenario that I was presenting in the video, it just didn't really come together for me, and I wound up making the statement that was very wrong. Now, I'll put a card to that video if you haven't seen it already. It was sort of a combination top-off / water change. I had already lost a lot of water due to evaporation, and then I did a little bit more of a water change on top of that. And what I said was that even though I'm only doing a small amount of removal of water, the fact that I'm going to be putting 5 full gallons back into the tank should bring the nitrate level way down, and we should see a nice yellow test result when we're done. And of course, when I did the test result at the end of the water change, I wound up seeing very little reduction in nitrate. And I had to scratch my head for a moment until I put all the pieces together. Again, these are all things I've known individually, but when I put them all together, it all just kind of made sense. So I'm going to sort of explain that scenario step by step and talk about what I mean exactly. So I've shot videos in the past about how topping off our tank is not a substitute for a water change. When water evaporates out of our tank, the water leaves our tank, but it leaves behind all of the dissolved solids. So your nitrates build up, your phosphates, all the dissolved solids, all the organics, all the fish hormones, all that stuff stays in your tank as the water leaves. So as the water level gets lower and lower, that stuff gets more and more concentrated into the water. And the video I always wanted to shoot and talk about was talking about just simply topping that off, just brings that back up to a full tank. It's not actually removing any of that stuff. It's all still in there. You're just kind of giving it a little more water to spread out in, so it sort of reduces the concentration of it a little bit, but a very little bit. You know, you putting a couple gallons of water back in might seem like a lot of fresh water, but in the grand scheme of things, you're not really adding a lot of fresh water back into that tank. And so if you've already got high loads of dissolved solids, putting more fresh water in there is not going to do anything. And of course, unless you're adding distilled water, you're probably adding more dissolved solids into the tank. So as the water level goes down again, you top it off, you're just distilling it down. You're leaving all these dissolved solids behind, and every time you add more water, you're probably adding more dissolved solids. The nitrate builds up, the phosphates build up, and so on and so forth. That I know. I've shot video about that in the past. If you want to remove that stuff, you have to do a water change to pull it out of there. So what I did was I looked at my 20-gallon tank. I saw that, you know, maybe 2 or 3 gallons had already evaporated out of it. But rather than top it off, what I did was I just took a couple more gallons of water out and made it an even 75% full. And then when I topped it off, I put 5 gallons back in. And in my mind, I was thinking of that as, you know, that's close to a 5-gallon, 25% water change, right? You know, I'm putting 5 gallons back in. But ultimately, all I took out was 2 gallons. So whether I was starting with a full tank or I was starting with a half a tank, whatever that had reduced to, when I took 2 gallons out of that, I was still simply removing 2 gallons from the water tank, from the tank. It was still a 10% water change, regardless of how much water I put back in. In fact, it would have been absolutely no different if I had topped the tank off first and then simply taken 2 gallons of water out of the tank and then topped that off with 2 gallons. That 2 gallons is how much I reduced the nitrates and the phosphate and the organics and so on and so forth. It's how much water you remove is the important part. The amount of dissolved solids are going to be concentrated into that water. So if I take 2 gallons out of this, or I take 2 gallons out of that, it's the same 2 gallons. It doesn't matter. When I put it back in the tank, I'm only putting 2 gallons of fresh water back, and then 3 gallons is simply top off. And so my statement about how I was really going to bring the nitrates down by doing a 25% sort of refill was very wrong. If you want to really reduce the nitrates by 25%, or you want to reduce the dissolved solids in general by 25%, and you're in that situation where you've already lost a bunch of water, what you do is you top the tank off. You bring it all the way back up to full, then you do your 5-gallon water change. You take 5 gallons out and put 5 gallons in. Now you have done a 25% water change. And so let's say we start with 40 parts per million nitrate. If I do 25% water change, that should bring it down to 30 parts per million. I've reduced 25% of the total dissolved solids, and that includes the nitrate. So the nitrate being the one we can test, I've reduced that to 30 parts per million now with this 25% water change. But if I'm in a scenario where I got a 20-gallon tank, 3 gallons have evaporated out, I'm still going to have 40 parts per million in that water, maybe even a little higher than 40 parts per million because it's condensed down a little bit. Me taking 2 gallons out of that, you know, I've still got 40 parts per million and what's left in there, and then me topping back off and just adding 5 gallons of fresh water, that hasn't reduced the amount of nitrate or organics or dissolved solids in the tank by very much at all. At the most, you can say I've done a 10% water change, and at that, again, because I've concentrated everything down, it's not really even the same. So again, I've said it before, there's just no substitute for doing a water change. If you want to really reduce the dissolved solids and you've lost some water to evaporation, top your tank off first, then do your big water change, and then you've done your full 25% or whatever the number is. If you start with a reduced amount of water, it's not going to be the same if you only bring it down to that halfway point and then fill it back up. That's not the same as a 50% water change. You'd have to fill the tank up, then do your 50% water change, and that would be it. Now, in my case today, I wasn't really trying to reduce the dissolved solids all that much. They weren't that high. I was just trying to freshen the tank up a little bit, so pulling a couple gallons out was fine, and it made it nice and easy, a well-rounded number to just put 5 gallons back in, and that was nice and simple. So that was no big deal, but I was wrong in that video, and that did make me think that this video was finally worth sitting down to shoot. So thanks for watching that one. Please leave your comments down below. I know that's probably going to seem pretty obvious to most of you, but you know, it's worth throwing out there. We all have those little brain farts where we don't think about things the right way sometimes, so maybe this will help drive that home for everybody. So thanks again for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't forget, this one here is my 125-gallon tank. Thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.